Danse, welcome to Soul Medicine, Ancient Psychologies for Wellness. I am your host, Dr. Karlee Fellner, psychologist and member of the Métis Nation of Alberta. As always, feel free to pick up what fits for you and to leave what doesn't. I'm just here to present a different way of understanding mental health and wellness. This podcast is not intended to provide or take the place of professional advice. If you or someone you know is in need of mental health supports, please reach out to one of the many resources available in your area or to a trusted professional.
All details and potentially identifying information about iyiniwak, people who I've worked with, have been changed to maintain their anonymity and privacy.
You may be wondering, what does a conversation about the body have anything to do with psychology? The answer is a lot. Iyiniwak Indigenous peoples have always acknowledged the whole human. Globally, mind, body, heart, spirit, we are a holistic being that is interconnected and cannot be separated or divided into separate pieces or parts that are not related to each other. In mainstream health services, we see the separation of the mind and the body, of medicine and psychology, as well as a pretty marked absence of acknowledgement of the spirit. This episode is about exploring the wisdom, the knowledges, the understandings that are being brought through the body, fully interconnected with what's happening for a person emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The vast majority of cultures globally acknowledge holism, that a person is an interconnected system mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, and cannot be separated into different parts that are somehow not related to one another. Within mainstream Euro-Western and North American society, we're seeing a lot more people returning to holistic approaches to wellness because they're finding that theory that human beings are merely two separate, disconnected components of mental and physical is just not working most of the time. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that some injuries or illnesses are not purely physical or purely mental. I definitely believe that this is possible. Bringing this acknowledgement of holism forward is really just about expanding our perspectives and looking at the whole picture. Because even with something, say, like a broken bone, sure, it may be a purely physical cause with purely physical treatment that works 100% for that injury, and there can still be mental, emotional, spiritual purposes and reasons for that injury and the healing that need to take place. This episode is really just about bringing forward a conversation that's not happening often within mainstream Euro-Western medical approaches at this time, and just exploring if there might be some information in the conversation that your body is having with you through whatever it is that you're going through right now. I'll start today's conversation from a psychotherapeutic perspective, that acknowledgement of the ways our body holds our experiences throughout life. In episode 2, I spoke a bit about trauma and the body, about how when we are faced with a survival situation, whether it's a direct and immediate threat to our life, a perceived threat to our life, or even if we're witnessing a perceived or a real threat to someone else's life, the way that our body responds in that moment by going into that survival mode. The oldest part of our brain, which is sometimes called the reptilian brain, kicks in with that ancient survival knowledge, takes over the rest of the brain, and helps our body to go into a survival response. Fight, flight, freeze, or collapse. And that survival response is going to help us through whatever that situation is in the moment. As I spoke about in our last episode, when an animal experiences a survival situation and goes into fight, flight, freeze, or collapse, and then they escape that situation and find themselves in a safe environment, they will allow all of that adrenaline, all that cortisol to flow out of their body through letting their body shake and move and giving whatever that experience was to the land so that they don't continue to carry it in their body. There are many reasons as human beings that we don't always do this. For one, we may not have the opportunity because we may actually be experiencing ongoing trauma where we don't find ourselves in a safe environment and we don't have that opportunity to safely release that survival response from our body. Also, as I spoke about last time, the many practices that iyiniwak Indigenous peoples globally have practiced for thousands and thousands of years to help shift and release trauma from the body have been oppressed and suppressed through colonialism. And so depending who we are, where we grew up, what practices we may or may not be familiar with, we may not actually know the tools that will help us to shift that trauma from our body and release it into the land. Another thing, as human beings, we're pretty complex and we can hold on to things mentally and emotionally without releasing them as well. For example, when we've experienced a significant betrayal or violation, it can be hard for us to release that, to let go of that mentally and emotionally. So there are a lot of reasons that traumatic experiences can, for lack of a better word, come stuck in different parts of our bodies. This is also a really important part of the way that our brains work to help us adapt and survive when we're right there in the middle of the situation where we're experiencing a trauma of any kind, but especially a trauma that might be happening directly to our bodies. There are a few different ways we can understand what's happening from a holistic perspective. One of the things that can happen is when we're experiencing trauma, our spirit can actually move out of our body so that our spirit isn't experiencing the trauma, the body experiences the trauma, and the spirit is left whole and intact. From a mainstream psychological perspective, this is often talked about as dissociation. You'll hear people share stories of how when they were going through a major trauma, they had an experience of actually witnessing their body from the outside as though they were watching the trauma take place. One possible way to understand that is that the person's spirit has come out of their body and it's witnessing what's happening. Because the spirit itself is witnessing and not experiencing the trauma directly, the body is experiencing that trauma, but the spirit is able to return whole and intact. As a psychologist, I've worked with a lot of folks who talk about how after a significant trauma, they feel disconnected from their spirit or from their spirituality, or they just don't feel like they have the same spark of life. And so that piece of the spirit leaving to protect itself can be a part of that experience. In some cultures, you'll hear of practices for bringing people's spirits back after they've experienced something really traumatic. So this is part of that understanding. Whether that fits for you or it doesn't, there are still neurological correlates that we can see in the brain that are going on. So you're in that survival situation, that ancient part of your brain is taking over, helping you get through, and the information that's coming in about the traumatic experience is getting filtered very, very quickly while the survival system is activated with adrenaline going, cortisol going. Information about the trauma that's being experienced is being stored differently and in different parts of the brain, as well as in different parts of the body. From a neurological perspective, this is why it's quite common for people not to have fully intact memories of traumatic experiences, because memory is not being stored in the same way as if we're in a situation where we're calm, present, fully connected and engaged with all of our senses and everything that's happening around us. To be clear, none of this is a bad thing. All of this is about survival and survivance, the ways that our body's wisdom kicks into gear to help us survive through whatever it is that we're experiencing in that moment. One of the teachings I received from Indigenous Focusing-Oriented Therapy is that acknowledgement of the transformation that takes place when we're in those survival situations. This beautiful process where our body's wisdom kicks in and knows what we need to transform into in order to survive that situation in that moment. So maybe we're being attacked and the response is that our survival system kicks in, we go into fight mode, we transform into a big bear. That big bear helps us fight off that attacker and survive. Just as much to be honored, we may be being attacked, our survival system kicks in, we go into collapse mode, we transform into the mouse that's playing dead. The attacker may do whatever it is they were going to do. Let's say they rob us, take our stuff, and they run away. That transformation into the mouse has helped us to survive just as much as the transformation in the bear. That ancient reptilian brain is what kicks in and with our body makes those decisions on what transformation needs to happen in that moment. These are all amazing, incredible processes that allow us to survive through some of the worst experiences that we can go through as human beings. Whether those are traumatic incidents that happen naturally, traumatic incidents that are inflicted by other human beings, and everything in between and around those. So again, we can walk away from those survival situations, and if we don't have a particular practice or the supports in place to help move that trauma out of our body and or bring our spirit back, whatever it is, the whole experience of that, then there may be aspects of that that are caught in different parts of our bodies. And sometimes it can be the most surprising places. I remember back in 2007 when I was working with people for the first time in therapy, I was very fortunate and blessed to have a supervisor and a mentor who practiced somatic approaches. One of the primary books that I used was Trauma in the Body by Pat Ogden, Kekuni Minton, and Claire Payne. One of the clients I worked with had a lot of stuff coming through her body. And I remember at first being like, this isn't a feeling, this isn't a thought, what do I do? Because so much of what I'd been taught in mainstream psychology was about focusing on thoughts and feelings and people's chosen behaviors. I had learned very little up until that point about the body and the way that the body held different stories of the experiences that we've had in our life. And I remember working with her with the support of this awesome supervisor and mentor, and realizing at that point how powerful working through the body was. This person had been diagnosed with multiple medical issues related to a certain kind of pain that she was experiencing. When we connected with that pain in the therapeutic space and made space for that pain to come forward and let us know what it was trying to say, that pain took her back to a time in her childhood that she was abused. Prior to this moment, she had never connected the two. Again, the pain she was experiencing was seen as a medical issue. It was diagnosed as a medical issue. It was being treated as a medical issue. But the medical treatment was only helping with the symptoms. It wasn't actually addressing the root of the pain itself and helping to shift the pain itself. And so it was only when we made space to listen to that pain in the context of therapy that that conversation came forward about this abuse in childhood, and it clicked. She had this realization, this pain is connected to this trauma. And her body was actually letting her know there's something I need to do here. So in her situation, experiencing the abuse, was she went into freeze, like the deer in the headlights. Her body froze stiff. Body was actually bringing her back to that moment of the abuse to say, I froze stiff here so I could survive. And that experience of that trauma is froze stiff in my body. I want to move it now, because that younger time was coming forward. That traumatic experience was coming forward. It was there in the room. She was in freeze and she just needed to move. And so we got up and we moved. Her legs wanted to walk and her legs also wanted to push. And so she started walking, and she kept walking and walking and walking, and then was pushing on the wall with her feet. For her, it was what her body wanted to do in that moment when she was experiencing the abuse, but wasn't safe for her to do. And so it helped to start clearing that energy out of her body. I was working from a somatic approach with a mainstream Euro-Western understanding. Since learning Indigenous Focusing-Oriented Therapy and doing all the work that I've done in iyiniwak Indigenous psychologies, I've come to understand that those actions and those movements were also helping that trauma move out of her body and into the land, so that the land could take it, transform it, and transmute it. When we listened to what her body was saying about how it needed to move, about how it needed to push, about how it needed to shift that energy that had been stuck, it released that pain that she had been experiencing for years. It turned out that the root of that pain was a tension and a holding of that traumatic experience in the body. And once we moved and shifted that energy through, it was no longer stuck in her body. body, and she no longer experienced that pain. Suddenly, her medical diagnoses fell off. She didn't need medical treatment anymore, and it was all connected to this experience of trauma. Now, of course, bodies aren't just letting us know about trauma. Bodies are having all kinds of conversations with us. It might be a conversation about grief that needs processing. It might be a conversation about something that's happening overseas that is out of balance with natural law, something that's not right, people who are being hurt and harmed. Our body could be having a conversation with us about our lifestyle, about the amount of movement our body needs, about the different foods our body needs, about whether we're getting enough rest, taking on too much through work, family, all of the different tasks that we're faced with. Our body can be having a conversation with us about the environments and contexts that we are in, relationships, workplaces. It could be all of those things. It could be none of those things. It could be any combination of those things. Regardless of the specific content of the conversation our body is trying to have with us, it's the same process of creating space for that conversation to come forward, to put ourselves in the perspective of the observer, which is a practice that's used in somatic therapies, mindfulness-based therapies, Indigenous Focusing-Oriented Therapy, and a number of approaches, coming into that observer perspective so that we have a little bit of space from whatever that bodily conversation is, and we're able to hear whatever the wisdom is that it's trying to bring us, as well as the action steps that go with that wisdom so that we can come into greater balance. In a previous episode of this podcast, I brought up heartburn because that's a conversation that my body has with me regularly when I start moving too quickly. I remember first experiencing heartburn and getting a peptic ulcer when I was a teenager. At that time, I understood it as purely a medical thing, something my body was doing. It was something to be medicated, and that's how I went about it. It didn't take me too long to figure out that there was a relationship between stress and the heartburn or the peptic ulcer. And of course, there's scientific research and medical information that shows when you have high levels of stress, the mucus lining in your stomach thins and your stomach acid can start to burn your stomach. So there is a physical explanation for it. And I was able to say, oh, okay, I'm stressed. I need to get my stress under control. I'm still going to use Euro-Western medicine to help medicate what I'm going through in the moment because it's painful and uncomfortable and it's interfering with my life. And I know I need to get my stress under control. Then as I advanced my knowledge and understanding of how our body has conversations with us, that relationship deepened even more to where I could take a step back, notice that fire that was burning, notice that it needs water, and that message of water is to flow, to get into a flow, a softer flow. That was the conversation my body was having with me. Take a step back, slow down to stop burning the candle at both ends and ease into a flow. It also usually brings some information about eating healthier and ingesting foods that are more cooling to the body as opposed to foods that bring heat. And to this day, with this comprehensive understanding, I still get heartburn. It's very rare, but every several years or so, I'll start to get a peptic ulcer again. If I'm repeating those same patterns and getting caught up in moving and running too fast and taking too much on again. And still, to this day, I will use the Euro-Western medicines to help ease those symptoms while at the same time taking that step back and knowing, okay, Karlee, it's time to make a shift. You're out of balance again. You need to come back into balance. Knowing that even if I'm medicating those symptoms, coming into balance is a thing that I need to do for lasting, lifelong health. If all I do is medicate the symptoms, but continue burning the candle at both ends, taking too much on in the long term, that's going to have much greater damaging effects on my body. Obviously, heartburn, peptic ulcers are super simple examples. This knowledge gets particularly useful in dealing with a lot more complex health issues that Euro-Western medicine can't figure out, doesn't know what they are, doesn't have treatment for, doesn't have a cure for. The other important piece of this, like I've talked about in previous episodes, is that when we're coming from iyiniwak, Indigenous psychologies and understandings, we are also acknowledging and aware that whatever the conversations are that are coming through our bodies may not be ours. Often those conversations have some elements of collective and intergenerational symptomology and wisdom and knowledge in them. That is an understanding I was introduced to when I first learned Indigenous Focusing-Oriented Therapy. That understanding of the collective and the intergenerational coming through the body is not something that I ever learned about within Euro-Western somatic approaches to therapy. And so it was in learning IFOT that I came to understand, whoa, okay, whatever is coming through our bodies is also collective and intergenerational, not just our direct experience. Sometimes what's coming through that body is purely intergenerational. It might be a chronic pain that actually stems from a trauma within the body of a grandparent, a trauma that they experienced that they never got to move or work out of their body. And that comes into our body to be shifted and released and brought into balance. It's all about that energy transfer and transformation. Coming back to those basic laws of physics that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred and transformed. Sometimes we're receiving that intergenerational transfer, as well as the transfers from the collective, our families, the communities we belong to, the nations and societies we live in, all of humanity, the land, the water, the air, the animals, all of our relations of the physical and metaphysical worlds. Another example of a person who I was working with in more recent years, they had an intergenerational cancer in their family. This person did not themselves have cancer, but they were very, very afraid of cancer because of the intergenerational nature of the cancer in their family. For this person, when she made space to listen to what is the conversation that the cancer is bringing, she tapped into the intergenerational wisdom of it. She realized that the cancer started to appear within her family lineage in the generation where the women had to oppress and suppress their practice of culture and ceremony because of the men that they married. It was something that they had to do at that time because it was so dangerous for them, not only in their relationships, but also in society. And so that conversation that was coming through was guiding this particular woman to return to ceremony, to return to community, to return to her cultural practices and to be her authentic self. She experienced a significant shift and healing through that work that she did, both for herself and for the generations before her. And again, these conversations are going to be totally different for everybody. That was just her specific story, her specific situation. One of my favorite people to listen to about this topic is Karlee Myss, a medical intuitive from the United States who has a lot of incredible wisdom and knowledge about cancers and various other health concerns and some of the different spiritual, emotional, mental, physical reasons that people might experience that. Just touching on another example, kidneys. Kidneys are a critical part of the filtration system of our body, filtering toxins and maintaining our body's health and wellness. I've worked with folks who are experiencing significant difficulties with their kidneys, some of whom could not get the answers that they needed through the mainstream medical system. I was working with a man once who was experiencing serious issues with his kidneys, and the mainstream medical system was having a really hard time figuring it out. The man himself was very troubled by it because he said, I live a healthy lifestyle, I eat well, I don't drink, I don't smoke. Physically, he was living a very healthy life. When we made space to listen to the kidneys in session and what information the kidneys were bringing, he realized it was because he was working in a very toxic work environment. Now, this also troubled him because he was really good at not taking on other people's stuff, at not getting caught up in the drama, not allowing toxic words or behaviors to bother him. And so again, in his mind, he was having a hard time making sense of it. Well, why is this an issue? If I'm so good at not allowing the toxins to affect me, then he realized that even though he emotionally and mentally was not affected by the toxic workplace was still having an impact on his body. It was the energy that was all around him there. And it was also his body's way of letting him know that he was remaining in a toxic work environment for the sake of job security, financial security, which, don't get me wrong, are really important considerations. But in his case, there were other opportunities available for him for employment if he left that toxic environment. And his body was letting him know he wasn't living congruently with his own values and his authentic self by staying in that toxic environment. And so he ended up leaving his position, going on faith and trust in his body and his spirit, starting a new venture culture entirely, and his health completely shifted. The medical concerns he was having with his kidneys dissipated, and he came back into health. Through his work with his kidneys, he also realized, looking back through his family, that had been a trend, in his case, for the men in his family to take whatever employment and financial security that they could, because that's what they had to do in their generations to survive and to ensure that everyone in the family was fed and taken care of, and to ensure that everybody lived, everybody survived. However, for this particular man, he didn't need to be in that situation. He had other options available. And so the kidneys were also a conversation that his male ancestors were having through his body to say, we don't need to do this anymore. This doesn't need to happen anymore. You need to get out of this environment to do what's best for you and your family. You will be healthier, you will be happier, and you'll still have what you need to keep food on the table and make sure everybody is taken care of. He's not only healing himself, but sending that medicine through that ancestral line and to the generations to come, because the generations that are coming know that that doesn't need to be the path that they need to take for survival, unless it ends up being essential for them, in which case they will be guided that way. I went through a similar shift when I left my position as a tenured academic at a university, because my body and my spirit were pulling me out of that space, pulling me to do other work and to live a different way of life on the land, working with people on the land, and having the time and space to more fully live my passions. I remember right around that time that I was resigning, listening to an audiobook by Myss, Advanced Energy Anatomy. In there, she talks about career, she talks about finances, and how we are taken care of when we follow the guidance and direction of our spirit, our intuition, our gut, our authentic self, however it is that you think about that or refer to that. It's powerful work. It's beautiful work. In today's society, health issues are at an all-time high. And again, coming from iyiniwak understandings of the whole person, mind, body, heart, spirit, being interconnected and always interacting, it is not surprising to see health issues and mental health issues hand in hand on the rise, because they are interconnected. They're different ways that our bodies are speaking to us, that our quote unquote symptoms are speaking to us to guide us into greater balance and harmony for ourselves, for our families, our communities, and for all of our relations. These increasing rates of all of this suffering are, of course, conversations letting us know that the world is out of balance right now. Because when we look around at various aspects of the way that humanity as a whole is living, the ways that people are treating each other, the ways people are treating the land, the environment, the animals, the world, water, of course, those conversations are coming through our bodies to let us know that things are out of balance. It's just as powerful having those physical health issues letting us know that this food you're eating is hurting you. The ways this food is being processed is hurting. There are so many layers of conversation, all interconnected to the mind, body, heart, and spirit. And don't get me wrong, it can be very, very difficult to find or to create space to hear those conversations coming through the body when whatever it is we are experiencing is so hard. When we are deeply suffering, when we are in immense pain, when we are deeply injured, whether that's mentally, emotionally, physically, or spiritually, it can be really difficult to make space for that conversation. And for some folks, this might be a place where that Euro-Western medicine can help ease some of that pain, ease some of that suffering for a while, so that we're able to create some space, be in relationship with whatever we're experiencing, hear that conversation, and receive the guidance. This is why the and that I mentioned in previous episodes is so important. Again, that was another teaching I learned in Indigenous Focusing-Oriented Therapy, to always come back to the and, because our Indigenous knowledge systems acknowledge all of the helpful pieces together. There are aspects of mainstream medical treatment that can be really helpful. And maybe that's also a part of our journey that we're meant to go on. That's meant to be part of our story and our experience and the medicine and the wisdom that we'll bring to others in the future. And there are also all these other ways at the same time, and they can go hand in hand. They can walk together. They can happen simultaneously. There's so many ways for this to be. There's so many ways for these conversations to be heard, listened to, engaged, and to guide us forward in a good way. There is no one way. Everybody's path is different and will take us to different places, different people, different spaces. The shift is really about just getting friendly enough with whatever it is we're experiencing, that we can be in relationship with it, that we can listen to it, that we can receive that knowledge, that understanding, and that medicine from it, engage that wisdom, and walk forward in a good way. When we do create that space to take a step back, be in relationship with whatever that difficulty, that pain, that suffering is that we're experiencing, we give ourselves the opportunity to hear that guidance, to hear that wisdom, to hear that medicine. And then our job, of course, is to take that in and to walk forward, integrating that. However, it's asking to be integrated in the ways that we live. And of course, not everybody is going to approach wellness or healing in this way. It's just an option. It's an offering. It's something that can bring a more holistic picture to whatever it is that we're experiencing. When we only come from one approach, we can be depriving ourselves of a universe of healing medicines and wisdoms. So if we are seeking help in that mainstream medical system and a healthcare provider tells us there is no way to treat this, there is no cure for this, remember that that is only true from that one specific worldview. And that specific worldview has one specific way of viewing whatever that concern is. So that worldview only knows a tiny, tiny amount, a pinprick of knowledge about how to work with certain concerns. And to know that if that is a case of interacting with the mainstream medical system, receiving the message, we can't figure out what this is, we don't know what's going on, or this is something we can't treat, this is incurable, just being sure to add those words on in our perspective, in our worldview, in the one way that we understand, in the one way we've been taught, in the one way that we practice. So in those situations, that may not be the place. And it's turning to this whole universe of knowledges and information out here, as well as turning to those conversations coming through the body to see what wisdom is there, what guidance, what medicine is being brought to me through this bodily conversation. And in closing this particular conversation today, just a gentle reminder to share some gratitude, some appreciation, some love with your body. Because despite whatever it is that you may be going through, that you may be experiencing, if you are watching, hearing, or reading this podcast, your heart is beating, your lungs are breathing, your brain is working, and your body is keeping you alive, carrying you through this relatively brief experience here in this body, at this time, on this planet. Share some love and some gratitude with your body for all that it does for you, even if and when it brings forward conversations that are really difficult. Hi. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you on the next full moon.